Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. This week I continue my three-part series on Earthdawn, talking about the setting. One of the key things you'll have to remember is that magic features heavily in Earthdawn. Even a swordsman or duelist, or even a thief, is heavily using magic for every single thing that they do. This is one of the more unique elements, because it's assumed that even using a sword is magical. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy as I talk about the setting of Earthdawn. The gorillas in the room of Earthdawn are Thrall and Thera. These are two warring ideologies. Thera believes that since everyone owes their life to Thera, that Thera owns them. The Theran Empire's main area in Barsave is an area called Skypoint. This is their headquarters, and it's where they send their ships to reinforce, send troops, etc. And first off, yes, slavery is their big shtick. They believe they own people, and that's their big thing. They still need to harvest vast amounts of true air, true earth, true fire, true water. They still need people to do the construction. So, every place that bends knee to Thera gets the choice in how to tithe them. In people, or in materials. And in many cases, it's cheaper to tithe people. And so Thera, they're not entirely evil per se, but they are amoral. They put everything in terms of, well, brutal practicality. Slave labor is cheap and efficient. And so that's what they'll use. Then you have the opposite ideology. You have the ideology of Thrall. Thrall is a dwarven city, and it put out a document just before the Scourge and discussed it and refined it during the Scourge. So this spent 800 years being argued, debated, and refined. And what they finally put out had a number of various concepts, but one of the big ones was the body is the possession of the spirit that animates it. In other words, your spirit and your body are separate, but your spirit owns your body. And no one else can own your body but your spirit. That's the basic concept of Thrall. They are good for trading. They're more egalitarian. They don't make people bend knee to them. They look at them as partners. They're not authoritarian. They're more democratic. And that's the two warring ideologies on the face of Barsave. Of course, you still have those who don't assign to either, and eventually those do have to pick one side or the other. Either going to Thrall for protection, from Thera, or bending knee to Thera because they don't have a choice. But that's the overall element right there. Of course, you do have other elements out and about. Like the elven civilization. The elves still, even though they don't necessarily follow Queen Elachi and the Bloodwood, they still respect the elven court and the Bloodwood. And in many ways they try to still embrace the old ways to some extent. But many of them during the Scourge and the time leading up to it sided either with Thera or Thrall, turning their back on the Bloodwood. But talking about the elves is a great segue into talking about the races of Earthdawn in and of themselves. There are a number of various races in Earthdawn, various sentient races. You know, we have the classic races: elves, dwarves, orcs, trolls, and humans. These are the classic fantasy races. Elves are tall and regal. Dwarves are short and practical and earthy. Orcs are taller, robust, have tusks. Trolls are way taller than everything else. Strong, tough. And, of course, you got humans, who are humans. And while it's debated, there's some belief that those races are all members of some unnamed single race, and just their actual races, not a separate species. And the magic levels exacerbate the differences between them, in that if the magic levels were lower, they would all be closer or the same as this unnamed single species. Of course, you then have the non-classic fantasies races. The Tiskrang. These are lizard men. They live in swamps. They have a flair for the dramatic as a culture. A great story of them is the quote for them. One's trying to tell someone, "Oh, you want to hear the story of how our race got our name? There are many versions. Now, listen closely to the sound inside your helmet." "What, that? Oh, no, that's just my tail." "Listen closely, and the answer will soon be revealed." Tiskrang! As his tail whaps upside the head. That's a really great example for me of what the Tiskrang are. They're warriors in a way, but they're a people. They're merchants. They're river pirates. They just have a inbuilt flair for the dramatic. Of course, then you have the Windlings. Windlings are small people, probably about this tall, with various fairy-type wings, because they are essentially pixies. A little bit taller than we think of pixies, but they are essentially pixies. And that pretty much describes them. They are mischievous at times, but at the same time, they're kind of vicious. I mean, a bunch of them can stab someone to death very easily. But, that's really them. And then you have the Obsidian. These are people of living stone. They have different looks based on the ores that they were born around. They are a slow-to-act people because they consider everyone else around them to be listening to the water of their blood, while the Obsidian listen to the stone of the earth. They slow to act, but when they act, it's decisive. And that is the races of Earthdawn. However, talking about the races of Earthdawn, I have to segue back to the Bloodwood. You see, the elves of the Bloodwood are different. They still have those thorns constantly growing up through their skin. They still live their life in pain. This still protects them from the horrors. They heal from wounds slower because some of their general healing efforts and energy is going into healing the damage caused by the thorns growing through their flesh. But they are generally stronger of will and a little bit more resistant to magic than other elves. However, they suffer from something called the wood longing. What this means is, if a blood elf leaves the woods, leaves the Bloodwood, after a time away, they start feeling a urge, a desire to go back to the Bloodwood. And for every month they resist, it gets harder and harder. Eventually, it starts causing physical harm to them, so that they have to return. And then they have to stay there for months to recover. It's not sure if this was intended by Alachia as a way to force those elves under her throne to have to stay close to her, or if it was an unintentional effect of the hastiness of the Ritual of Thorns. But one way or another, this is just an element that they have to deal with. Of course, magic. Magic is the lifeblood of the Earthdawn setting. And that needs its own section to talk about. So let's start talking about the basic nature of magic. Imagine, if you will, the world is covered with threads. That these threads connect everything that has a name somehow. And magicians, whether they be an elementalist, a nethermancer, a wizard, what have you, what they do is they reweave these threads. Now, they have 3 ways that they can do this. One is a variation on a second. The first way is they attune a spell matrix. They basically have something set up, a astral construct, that they put their spells into. Each spell matrix can hold 1 spell for the most part. And what happens is they will put the energy that they need for these spells into this matrix. And from there, they can cast the spell over and over again. Well, most of the time. Some spells are extremely complex, and so they have to have the spell in the matrix, but then they have to start threading energy into it. And once they start threading the energy into it, weaving threads into it, it expands the matrix, puts the spell out, zapping it out. Basically, for most for simple spells, it's, here's the matrix, it has the whole spell. For more complex spells, here's the matrix, this is the spell zipped. We're going to unzip it by plugging threads in. And then cast the spell. Now, a mage can pick up a grimoire and cast a spell through that. However, they still have to attune a spell matrix to the spell they're casting. The spell's not locked into their memory, though, so they are using the grimoire as the guide for casting it. The third method is why spell matrices exist. This is the manipulation of raw magic. Now, any magician can cast raw magic spells. They probably shouldn't. There are risks involved. The mage himself, for instance, becomes the spell matrix, channeling all the energy for the spell through themselves. And then there's the simple fact that every time a magician casts magic raw, casts it without using a spell matrix, they're ringing a dinner bell for horrors. And it's a chance that nearby horrors will notice. And if they're lucky, the horrors will just come and try to eat them. If they're unlucky, the horrors will mark them. And horror marks are terrible things. It means that horror can track that mage, see what goes on around that mage, know what's going on, put thoughts into that magician's mind, making it easier for the horror to find its way back to them as well. And oh yeah, the horror will know exactly where the magician is. So, that is why casting raw magic is a bad idea. But, when you talk about magic in Earthdawn, you also have to take into account names. That's names with a capital N. And it's... the best example is one that they gave in the book. You know, you've you've got a small copse of trees behind your house. You'll call it those trees out back, or that grove of trees. But a hero is chased by a bunch of ravaging shadow hounds into that same group of trees. That hero, let's say the hero's name is Selesnya, and Selesnya fights, unleashing terrible magical abilities and fighting desperately through the night before finally being killed just before dawn by the last of the shadow hounds. That copse of trees is now where a great hero died. That copse of trees is now not those trees out back. That is now Selesnya's demise. And it has importance in the world because it has a name. Because the name represents that it witnessed great events. Terrible, powerful events. Or it could also be something tremendously joyful. But something happens that gets it named. And it matters now. It matters in the world. Anything with a name, which means anyone who is sentient, has a name. Anyone who is sentient can give something a name. Humans are name givers. Trolls are name givers. Obsidian and are name givers. Dragons are special. Dragons are name makers. We can give something a name and make it matter. Dragons can create a name from nothing. And that makes dragons more powerful with regards to magic than any of the other species. But, back to the basics of magic. Names matter because they are the history of something and how it interacts with magic. When something gains a name, it gains a true pattern. And the name, the understanding of the true pattern, allow great manipulation of those patterns. A named sword has a true pattern, and it can do greater, more powerful things the more its wielder understands about its true pattern. And this is the process of enchanting an item. Learning it, naming it, weaving the threads to create a history and strength to it. And that is magic in Earthdawn. Now, everything that's named has a true pattern. And there are items that are connected to them. You know, like my shirt would be considered a pattern item because it's something linked to me. However, my glasses, these are something that's linked to me, but I wear constantly. They're part of my identity. These would be a major pattern item because of just how significantly tied to me they are. And then there's core pattern items, which are even more than that. They are something so intrinsically linked to something that even if it gets destroyed, fate and reality are going to lead to the recreation of it and getting it back into your hands. But that fate and reality keep it generally from getting destroyed. And that's the importance of pattern. Because things are linked to you, and your pattern provides degrees of protection to them. The minor pattern items can be destroyed or damaged like anything. Major pattern items, they can be damaged, but it takes more effort to destroy them. A book might be singed, not incinerated. And then, of course, the core pattern items, fate protects them. And that is a rough overview of magic and its interactions in Earthdawn. On the spellcasting and mystical level. However, you also have to take into account that there's a whole second type of magic user. The adepts. And adepts are special. An adept is someone who is using magic physically. A swordsmaster or a thief are both two schools of adepts. And anyone can learn how to pick a pocket. That's a very mundane skill. An adept thief picking a pocket, they're not reaching up, pulling something out. They're seeing in advance how you're going to move. They know how you're going to move. They know where you're going to be as they're reaching out, down, picking that item out of your pocket. A swordsmaster. Anyone can pick up and train to use a sword. A swordsmaster, however, first off, the sword truly is an extension of them because of their talents, because of their magical abilities. That sword is like a part of them, truly like a part of them. But they're faster. They can find those chinks in a creature's armor. They can find those weak spots. And their sword slips right into those no matter how fast they're moving. Because it's guided by magic, not skill. And that is the difference. And that is why all your characters in Earthdawn are using magic. Because the other thing is that the talent, the magical talents that let them use their swords, let them pick the pockets, mean that they can hurt horrors. They can hurt magical creatures with these, which they could not do if they were using a mundane version of the skills. But that is the setting for Earthdawn. Next week, I will be talking about the mechanics of Earthdawn. So until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.